This is the business culture of agriculture. My name is Andy Junkin, and with me tonight is David Marrison. He's from Ohio State University. He's a county extension agent. Welcome to the show, David. Tell us about where you're located and what you do.
Okay, Andy, I'm over in Ashtabula County, so I'm as far northeast in the state of Ohio as you can get, right on the Pennsylvania border, on next to Erie, Pennsylvania, couple hours out of Buffalo, New York, right in the corner, about an hour east of Cleveland. So I'm nestled in that snowbelt country of Ohio.
Gotcha. And describe the type of farms in your area. Is it mostly dairy producers,
We
livestock hoppers?
We're a very diverse county, so we have dairy is our largest commodity, but also we're the number one grape growing region in the state of Ohio, and as well as we're the number one miscanthus grower for biofuel, bioproduct. Actually, it's going into bioproducts in the nation, with about 5,000 acres of miscanthus grass that's grown here in Ashtabula County.
Really?
And
And
that's pretty intriguing because it's all being made into compostable plates. And it's not a biofuel, it's going right into a plate product. So clamshells and paper plates, and the best thing is you get to use them, and when you're done, you throw them into your compost pile.
have you been part of that project to get that off the ground over the years, or?
Yeah, it's been here for about 5 years, and Alaterra Energy is the company that is growing a lot of it, renting farm ground to do that. So we've been in an advisory capacity with them. So it's been a really neat adventure to watch from the ground level going up.
Man, we're going to have to almost do a show on that itself.
That's fascinating in
It's
itself.
really cool.
Mhm.
Tell me about your experience. Like, you do a lot of farm transition planning. Is that correct with the state?
That is correct. You name a state, I've probably been in it to do some farm transition work, and it's just been of interest after watching our family farm go through a train wreck situation when I was
Yeah.
early in my 20s, and it's just been a fascinating area and one that needs a lot of attention across the country.
Tell us. I mean, it's been. My own parents got divorced because of it, and it's driven you ever since. That's so. What's your program? So if I'm a young producer, I come to you with intent to take over the family farm. How do you work with them, and what do you recommend to a young producer?
Yeah, and that's boy, we could talk all night on that. And I try to put it in a question format. What are the questions that we need to answer as a farm family as we go forward in a farm transition, as we put that plan together? And of course, that first question is there a future for that next generation? In other words, is there enough money for them to come back to the farm, work with mom and dad, to move forward? So that's the very first question that we will discuss is, how do I work to build the gross sales of the farm and be able to sustain multiple families, and knowing what it actually takes to live. That's completely different for every farm family. You know, you have some that will live on $25,000 to $30,000, and then there's other families that it takes $100,000 for them to live. So we talk a lot about that, and family communication is a huge issue. A question to answer is about what are some of the weak links as far as farm transition, as far as communication. And I would think out of the greatest area of a struggle for a family farm is just to communicate well about what's going to happen in the future. And I think probably the biggest area that I'm finding is we just don't put a good plan in place about how do I teach the next generation everything that they need to take over, and how do I put a plan into place. And we center around that. And then we'll delve into topics such as retirement issues for the senior generation. How do we prepare for that generation and transition out? Also, I think you can't talk any farm transition or any business without talking about the oh crap things that can happen, the unexpected. You know, here in Ohio, there's 40% of all marriages end in success. The other 60%, will end up in a divorce. So you have to talk about divorce, death, disability. We talk about now with generations living older, how do we plan for one of our generations, one or two folks going into long-term care facilities for the nursing home dilemma, as we call it. So there's all those unexpected things that you talk about. as well as then what happens with the transition of assets. How do you do that in a good, orderly fashion? What assets are transferred first? Which do you wait for death so that you get a step up in basis and those? So we asked 9 questions, and the 9 questions as we go through, we have a program that goes across the state called Passing on Your Family Farm. In the front half of that program, we do all this, what I would say, the soft skills as far as answering the questions. How do we set up management? How do we set up good job descriptions? How do we set up that timeline for transition? And then on the back half is, how do I do it on estate taxes? How do I do it for the transition of assets? And of course, probably the hardest question that families struggle with is, how am I fair to the son or daughter that's staying on the farm while maintaining or gifting or willing some assets to those children that might have left the farm? That question about fair and equal comes up an awful lot.
So, I mean, what's a general timeline for transition in your state? Like on average, most sons and daughters that they're in their early 20s, they think that, it's going to happen before they're 25.
And we'd say good luck with that, because the transition will take plenty of time. In fact, I read a report the other day that the average, if you set up a transition correctly, that transition of when you start the plan to when the next generation should take over could be up to 20 years.
Yeah.
To where you transition. Now, we will say the caveat there, hey, if I'm back home working with mom and dad for 7 years and I'm still doing the same thing that I did when I came home, i.e., I'm just basically a hired hand without a plan to take over sectors of the business and to be the frontline manager where I step into a role, then you're truly not in a transition plan. You're just waiting for mom and dad to pass away. So what can you do each year? And there should be targeted goals. And that's why we think that we're planning for the future. Oh, I'm teaching my son or daughter what to do. But you actually sit down at the beginning of the year and say, you know what? We have 365 days of this year. What are the things that we're going to do during 2017 that at the end of the year we can look back and say, okay, we have transferred those skills to you. Now let's look forward to the next year, and there should be some type of plan in place that I'm going to keep moving up into the management role of that farm.
I think that annual discussion, like I have a program that I give guys I'll sit down with a family for 2 hours for free. I think it's so critical that at the beginning of the year or anytime in the year, the family sit down and talk about, their goals for the forthcoming year and their goals as far as transition.
Absolutely.
That's so critical, and just doesn't happen. How many times have you seen it happen? How many farms do you know that they're actually doing performance reviews of their sons and daughters on an annual basis or a quarterly basis?
Yeah, very, very, very small percentage. It's not very many. I'm just shocked at the number that they do not have job descriptions. But for each sector, your business, you could have a job description. And I'm just thinking of the dairy farm that I grew up on. There's a whole job description just in the management of the cows, but then there's also a complete job description on the planting and the management of the crops that are going to be used as feed inputs. So you go through that, and then you start talking about financial management. You have the human resource management, dealing with employees that you're hiring.
Yeah.
The risk management as far as insurance on carrying insurance on crops, or maybe it's federal farm programs that you might enroll in. I think if a farmer starts to really think about all the different tasks that they do in a given year, it would be staggering the amount of information that they need to teach the next generation to be fully equipped to run that business in the future.
And how many guys do you know of that have come to you after their dad died of a heart attack, let's say, or was on the operating table and 2 weeks later he was gone?
Yep.
And it suddenly happens. They just feel overwhelmed.
Yeah, and that's what Andy, the one thing I say is when I do our programs here, I have what I call the possum approach to farm transition management. And that simply is that, okay, if I were a possum and I get to play dead,
Yeah.
and I am gone for, let's say I pick the busiest time in here during planting season for us here, that would be the month of May. I leave a note on the door, and on May 1st, I'm out the door and I tell my kids, see you later. I'm going on vacation. Don't call me, I'll call you. Good luck with planting crops. And the question is, and a lot of guys will laugh at you and you say, but if that happens, would your son or daughter who's back in the business be able to go forward without you? And the best thing about playing possum is that after a couple weeks away, you get to come back and you get to process that.
Yeah.
Of course, that could be a train wreck in the happening if you're not ready. But just from my personal experience, we were milking 50 cows on a small grazing dairy here in the county, and my dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer on May 1st. And that's just a horrific cancer to get. And then 7 weeks later, my dad had passed away. And here he got, again, pancreatic cancer diagnosed May 1st, right in the time that we're getting into the ready of the field. Not only are we managing the cows, but we're managing everything that was happening in the fields that we learned really quick the things that we didn't know and that we had to get input from dad on. So,
and one of my best friends from back home, I mean, he inherited 1,000 acres. I mean, his dad got a similar type of cancer, and I mean, his dad bought the combine. I mean, he was, we'll call him Jim. I mean, Jim, he was driving a combine for his dad fell off a ladder a couple years before, and so he was pretty much doing all the work. His dad had it was a bad break, and he was doing all the work. But you know, it was his dad that made the decision whether to buy the combine or not.
That's correct.
That went down to the bank. So I mean, it's easy to get a crop planted in the spring. I mean, a 12-year-old could figure that out.
Right.
But the whole sophistication of management, that's a whole different level that a lot of producers think, oh, it's easy, but it's really not.
It was, simply, dad would be the one making the crop insurance decisions. Well, all of a sudden you're making those decisions, or what are the federal farm programs? What am I doing with my enrollment there? And it's all those little things that you would never assume that you would need to know, and then you're thrown into that, making decisions on workers' compensation, whatever it may be. It's just it will throw your business for a loop. So to me, it's easier to take a skill every day.
Yeah.
The 365-day challenge is what are you teaching the next generation today? Okay, so February 8th, I taught them this. February 9th, I have a plan tomorrow to teach them this. And you look at all those different aspects of management that you would have, and if you have good business meetings as a family, you could start going through all these different areas and setting them up for success. If not, it's like typical businesses. They get into that second and third generation, and they start to struggle.
And let's talk about confidence. Like, how big of a factor is confidence to a success of a farm long term? Like, there's one thing to learn the skill of doing insurance. It's the other factor is, I mean, when you walk into a bank, if you've never walked into that bank and been part of the negotiation of, the terms of a loan, for instance, and negotiating interest rates,
right?
That confidence, it really affects the business, and we've never measured that. I don't know, at the state, Ohio State, have you guys ever measured that? Or
no? It's a very difficult thing to look at. I mean, there's just the things that we can do as business partners. We're so busy in farming.
Yeah.
We tend not to think about, okay, life without me, and am I teaching the things that I need to teach? And so sure, I go in as the primary operator for those years. There comes a point in time that this year I'm taking son or daughter in with me, and we're going through the operating loan negotiation together. Then next year I'm having them develop that balance sheet with my assistants. Then as we get into the third or the fourth year, soon, then mom and dad can say, okay, son and daughter, whatever it may be, that junior partner, you're going into the bank without me this year. And that's why we think, well, we'll just transition this in a year. That to be very functional and to do it to where it takes decades. It could take decades.
At least a decade. Yeah.
Right, and we learn a lot, like you said, about production agriculture because we grow up on the hip of our parent. So I can fix fence, I can do the crop work, I can milk the cows, I could manage the cows, because we were there, we saw, we learned from that experiential learning. I mean, I can pitch out a box stall probably better than anybody in the
Yeah.
United States because I had lots of practice. But when it came to making those decisions about crop insurance and workers' compensation and all those more management skills, that takes you some time to figure and get to that confidence level like you talk about.
And estate taxes, I mean, everybody going into succession planning, that's their biggest concern. What percentage of the actual succession is estate taxes? What?
Yeah, and for me, that this is, and ironically, this is why people will come to the meeting. Well, I want to save estate taxes, and I will tell you that is the least of my concerns. And well, it may be a little concern right now for some things that are happening in Washington, but at $5.49 million exemption per person, or as a couple, I can transfer on $11 million basically. So we're just short of $11 million right now. There are most of our farms here in Ohio, that $11 million is not a problem. And then we also had Governor Kasich came in 2013. He repealed the Ohio estate tax. So here in Ohio, if I'm a farmer and I own less than $11 million, then I should have very, very few concerns about the whole transfer of my assets. And then it's just working about how to do that. Now, I do have some concerns about what's happening with the repeal of the federal estate tax, and I'll just briefly mention that real quick, that there's legislation in at the federal level to repeal it. And then I say, well, be careful what you wish for on that, because the truth is going to be in the details when it comes to that. And my concern and my apprehension on what's happening here until we see the details is, if they completely repeal the federal estate tax, does that mean the step up in basis is gone? And that step up in basis is a huge critical issue for us, that when our loved ones pass away, and that farm that my grandfather bought for $10 an acre that is now worth $5,000 an acre, that it steps up to its current present value for the next generation. And there has been talk about, if the step up in basis is gone, would that mean if assets then transfer from one generation to generation, would it be subject to capital gains tax or a transfer tax instead? So I could see a situation where I own a $5 million farm. Right now, it transfers here in Ohio free and clear to the next generation. But maybe that's gone and the step up is gone, and now there's a transfer tax in the future. Now I'm paying a 20% capital gains transfer tax on that. So now on a $5 million farm, I'm going to owe $1 million in that transfer tax. So watching what happens in Congress is going to be really intriguing here as we move forward. My hope is maybe the best case scenario for farm families is they repeal the federal estate tax, yet they leave the step up in basis for when a member passes away. Like your father passes away, you'll still get that step up in basis on the equipment and the land and the other capital assets that you might have on that farm. So that will be really something interesting to watch here as we go forward.
What's the timeline on that bill?
Well, it's in the House Ways and Mean Committee, and I know there's a companion bill on the Senate side. With Congress, and I would say it will probably be there for a while, but with this new administration, it's hard to judge what the time period is going to be on some of this legislation. But tax changes, as well as some tax repeals, some changes in the tax code, as well as the federal estate tax, were high on the Republican agenda. So I would think you'll see some type of movement here in 2017. Now, it may not be until the latter part of 2017, but it's something to watch on. And just because it says, oh, repeal the federal estate tax, be careful, because really in any legislation, it's the detail that is critical that we are looking for.
Yeah. What about now let's go on a totally different topic. You
Hmm.
mentioned a lot of divorces that you're dealing with in Ohio.
Hmm.
Um, what's your do you see quite a few farm families where the parents are reluctant to transfer do succession planning with the
Yep.
son and daughter,
Yep.
and that in itself is actually causing the daughter or son-in-law to
Hmm.
consider just leaving the family because they don't feel welcome.
Yeah, and there's not that security, and I hear it in every program. Like they'll whisper to you on the way to the restroom, like, "How do I make sure the old daughter-in-law here doesn't divorce my son and take the whole thing?"
Yeah.
And the way I have approached this in programs and what we say here in Ohio is we're concerned not about only the younger generation, but let's look at all of the generations when it comes
Yes.
to a change in marital status. And
Yes.
this happened on our farm before I was even born. My grandmother passed away before I was born back in the 60s, and my grandfather remarried.
Yes.
He had three grown sons. My grandmother had three grown daughters. If he hadn't done some good planning ahead of time, and he did pass before my grandmother did, that farm then would have gone to my grandmother, who would then probably ended up into her three daughters, and that farm would not have stayed in my grandfather's line. But using a prenuptial agreement way back in the 60s, he avoided that, and the farm stayed within in the Marrison side of the family. And I, we have always promoted that as a business structure, regardless of what business organization we're under, that there's some type of writing within the context of whether I'm an LLC or a corporation, a partnership, whatever it may be, that there is protection in the language. If we're really serious about that farm continuing for multiple generations,
Yes.
then any change in marital status, any change, regardless if that's dad who's 75 years old, if that's son who's 25 years old, any change in marital status should be protected. And here in Ohio, that protection would be through a prenuptial agreement. And it's not because you don't love the person that you're marrying. The way that should be communicated is it's that we love the legacy of the farm so much that the business operation is doing everything to protect it, to maintain its viability for multiple generations here forward.
Yeah.
So that's a big discussion, but some parents will not transfer it because they're scared of son or daughter getting a divorce.
It's
And
a,
it's
it's a
it's
huge problem that's
yeah,
actually causing a lot of divorces. I've
yeah.
seen like there's a lot of sons that are 40 years old.
Mm-hmm.
They've been working on the farm for 20 years, basically for next to nothing.
Yep.
And the daughter-in-law is sick of it. She says, you got nothing in this operation. Your parents are
Yep.
never going to give it to you.
Yep.
They favor your brother and sister that never have anything to do with the farm.
Yep.
Why are we here? Why am
Yep.
I working? It's I think the key is prenuptial agreements have a lot of a negative context to it. It's
Right.
often brought up the week before the wedding. I've officiated 42 weddings as a
There
licensed,
you go. Okay.
and I've mediated about as many marriage. I get called in the week before a wedding to sort things out within a family that just
Mm-hmm.
has a lot of stress. But
Right.
I think the key is to not leave the daughter-in-law or the son-in-law on the side of the county road with nothing. And so if you can when you do a prenuptial agreement,
Mm-hmm.
it's important to leave them fairly compensated and in a position, where they're, say a portion, they're bought out over a 10-year period. So there's not one check that's signed that puts the
Mm-hmm.
farm in bankruptcy.
Right.
But there's a gradual, the other thing I like to see is, if there's a house and the farm has 16 houses because it's a large operation, give a house to that in-law so that
Mm-hmm.
they stay nearby and so that the kids are on a different area or they're not 5 hours away living in the city and never get exposed to the family farm, or else you'd have no successors in the long term. But anyways,
Right. I think that
what,
the big thing there is that we just need to have the discussion.
yeah, yeah,
Talk about it, and we're so afraid to talk about issues The
Yeah.
key is just sitting down and doing the what ifs. What if? And it's just that's why we buy car insurance. What if I get in a wreck? There you
And,
go.
and I always say, have that discussion when your son or daughter are 20.
Right.
You
Hmm.
know, before
Not the week before they get married and you're shoving a prenup under the daughter-in-law. Hmm.
one article I wrote, I said, have the prenups stack, have 10 or 15 prenups above the kitchen fridge. And before she ever eats pie out of that fridge, she has to sign a prenup. And if she ever wants to get married, she has to sign that again, you know, and leave it on the kitchen table that she's ready for a ring. You
Yeah.
know,
No. Also, I think you probably should look at the other side, the gray divorces that are happening, gray hair that we're
big
all
time,
getting.
big time.
The gray divorces are happening. The kids, the last child goes to um, college and moves off the farm, and then those frustrations that have just been boiling for years because some of the things that you talked about, then we get that divorce situation 20, 30 years into the marriage, and that can throw a farm into a loop too.
I'm a victim of that, so I know
Uh,
all about that. But what I've been surprised by is widowers. You know,
yes.
a lot of men that they just can't survive, and so
Hmm.
6 months or 8 months they have a girlfriend, and within a year they're married, and that just sidewinds a lot of farm families. I mean, the
That's
son or daughter thought that they were. How many times have you seen that, David? Like it's
I I there's a couple different situations here in Ohio, and you have dad remarrying, and it throws that dynamic of when a spouse is lost, and then the reaction of the kids to the loss of a spouse is one that I think and until you've been in that situation, you don't you underestimate the impact of how that is. And I'm 48 years old, and I'll tell you, I'm a widow. I lost my wife to cancer, and just watching the family dynamics change after the loss of a spouse, I did not appreciate what my mom went through when she lost my dad, because the pain of losing your dad is great enough, but I had underestimated the loss of a spouse. And that will really throw a farm family operation into just a whole whirlwind of emotions that are very difficult to deal with.
yeah.
So it's nice. These are things that as a parent, in hindsight, it's easy to say this, but as a parent, these are conversations we should be having with our kids when they're 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, as they are maturing, to
Yeah.
have these open conversations about what has happened or what could happen and how that you'll deal with that.
Or at least before they're 21 and they're actually going to go find a spouse.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
And
Hmm.
have it for all generations, because I mean, there's a lot of 72-year-olds that get remarried to somebody who's 40,
Yep.
and
Hmm.
that's throwing the whole dynamics of the family off.
That is very correct.
Um, just fair and equal. I mean, you deal with this issue a lot. Why don't you just briefly talk about that?
Uh,
Uh,
Boy, this is the lightning rod issue, the fair versus
yeah,
equal. And one of those things that, and this is it comes down to the question of what do I want to happen to the farm? If it's a business that there's no generation that will follow, then it may be just like a plumbing business in town or an insurance business or attorney law firm. We had this happen with a local apple orchard. There was no one in the next generation to follow. So what their plan was very different. What they basically put the balance sheet together, advertised it for sale, and then it was sold. Of course, they did this before they passed away, but in the respect that there is no heirs to succeed, then that probably becomes a little more equal. Of course, if you love your kids all the same and they're all equal, you might split that equal. But where we would come down here is that if I'm interested in that farm operation going into multiple generations, then I try to keep those farm assets with the farming heir, and I look to work to if I'm leaving assets to the off-farm heirs, then I'm probably looking at doing that through different mechanisms, maybe they become the beneficiaries on some retirement accounts, a life insurance policy, some other off-farm interest, but the farming entity, so that would be the main operation. So if it was a dairy farm, that would include the cows and the equipment and that type of thing. Maybe there is a situation, depending on the dynamics of the family, that the land is put into a structure, and then depending on the family, that may be a different manner. But for instance, one could be, and I'm not saying this for, maybe it goes into an LLC, and the land is owned by the LLC, and all the kids own that together, and they rent that land back to the on-farm heir. But I think we run into a lot of trouble when we try to be equal to all of our kids. And sometimes when we are equal, then that becomes the detriment of that farm being able to survive for the next generation. And I give the example in one of our workshops of a $2.1 million farm here in Ohio that had 7 kids, and they chose to split it equally. So the on-farm heir had to come up with $1.8 million to buy out his brothers and sisters. And that's a big chunk of change for a small farm that's only worth $2.1 million. But basically coming up with $1.8 million. And that is fine if there's a plan, because we can plan for that if we have a good planning horizon of 10 to 15 years. The business can do a lot of things to help the on-farm heir be able to do that. So that's a sticky question, and there's no cookie cutter approach.
Yeah.
But fair or equal is not fair usually when it comes to farm transition.
And how many farm families do you see that they actually answer the question about a fair and equal when this eldest son or daughter are in their early 20s? So it's very clear that if you want to come home and farm, this is the opportunity, but you have to do this.
Right. And that's important, because we know when you bring a son or daughter home, because of their work, they're helping to grow the business's net worth at a level greater than if mom or dad were just farming by themselves. So having a good balance sheet and tracking that growth, some of that is growth is because of son or daughter, but some of that growth is also because of mom and dad. And how do you divvy that out? You need to have that conversation early, not later.
Exactly.
As you said.
Yeah, I think I try to meet with families when they're early 20. I have a program called Farming with Family, where I sit down with the kids I'll sit down for 3 hours for free, and we talk about,
Good for you.
Yeah, I do that over the internet, so it's free, and we sit down, we talk about setting expectations for the sons and daughters to come home in the farm, and if you're not a farming heir, what's their expectations of the estate 20 years down the road. So that's clearly from the beginning. And also just say, how tall do you have to be to get on this ride? I mean, coming home and sleeping in, and because it's an easy place to work, it's not, you can't have that expectation. So, okay. So targeting I really appreciate your time. Just one long-term care. How big of an issue is it? And do you have any insight into that? Like, it's becoming more and more of an issue.
Well, it's as we live longer, as generations live longer, and there may be 2 generations that are retired from the farm at the same time. That's the likelihood. And the statistics show that somebody's going to go into a nursing home probably from that farm business. So the question is, how am I going to mitigate that risk? Are we going to self-insure? Is there someone in the family that's going to take care of grandma and grandpa when they get old? Or are we going to go out and buy long-term care insurance where we're covering what that average nursing home stay may be 3 years? And I know there's statistics out there. 3 years, maybe that's costing here in Northeast Ohio about $75,000 a year. So when you get into that, are you able to come up with that $200,000 plus that it's going to take to have someone in a nursing home? And the sooner you make that decision, if I'm buying long-term care insurance when I'm 65, forget it. It's going to be like any insurance, very, very expensive. But if I'm buying it when I'm 52, then that policy becomes a lot cheaper to buy. But maybe I don't buy long-term care insurance. Maybe we're going to self-fund that. But to have that, so when we're doing the oh crap moments, what could happen? Death, divorce, disability. Well, long-term care in nursing home, that needs to be part of that discussion about how are we going to overcome this risk that could happen to the farm.
And how many times do you see that the mom and dad just do not want to talk about long-term care facilities because they don't want to envision themselves being in that state?
Right. And that will happen a lot with, I think generationally, it really depends on the person, a lot of factors, but boy, it's a tough discussion to talk about unless you've seen someone in the family be there.
Yeah.
I was teaching the other night, and a lady there said, yes, we bought it when we were 52 because she said there's been a pattern of dementia in our family. And she says, I just recognized the need for this because I didn't want my husband, if I had dementia, to have to be watching me 24/7 and worried if I was going to walk out the door and get lost. She said, we saw that, so we addressed it. So I think in some families, it's an easier discussion because they see it happen. Other families, it's like it just hits them straight in the face and they never saw it coming.
And I think the key thing is for the farmer to recognize, who are you as a person? Are you a steward of the land? Is this conversations you've had all your life saying, oh, I'm doing this so I can pass it over to my kids? Is that for real, or is the farm about you? Right. And if I think that's the key thing is the farm all about you, or do you want to really have the farm go on 50 years after you pass away?
Right.
And if you can get the parent to actually think in that context, it makes a big difference as to whether they embrace succession planning and estate planning, or they continue to pretend it's not going to happen to them. They're invincible.
And if it does happen, I mean, boom, if they care about the farm and we have to start selling farm ground because we're paying for a nursing home because we have assets, there goes the farm for the next generation.
Your life legacy is gone. All your work.
You're very correct. Yep.
Good. Okay. Well, David, it's been awesome meeting you tonight. And
pleasure. My pleasure. Glad we got the technology going.
Yeah, it's great. So we'll talk to you again. And thanks very much. This has been the Business Culture of Agriculture. With me tonight has been David Marrison. He's from Ohio State University. David, how can people reach you?
Okay, you can reach me. Email marrison.2, marrison.2 at osu.edu. If you're on Twitter, just go @farmtransition, and that's my Twitter handle for farm transition, or @dmarrison, or whatever way. Or my phone number down here in Ohio is 440-576-9008 here at the Ashtabula County Extension Office. Anyway, or just do a Google on David Marrison. You might get excited what you see. There might be a bunch of us out there. So I'm just the guy in Ohio, in Northeast Ohio in the snow belt. So,
well, Dave, it's been good to meet you. Thanks very much. And
my pleasure.
Tomorrow night at 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time with the Business Culture of Agriculture. We have Paul Raymer is going to be speaking about GIS technology. Okay, we'll talk to you again.